in the crazy world of mixed martial arts. Fighters willingly step into the octagon where every strike thrown, every takedown shot, and every submission attempted is a calculated risk. Sometimes, those risks can turn deadly, as the relentless pursuit of victory collides with the very real and always unprecedented dangers within the cage. Join us as we check out some of the scariest and most brutal moments in UFC history that remind us all of the fine line between triumph and danger inside the octagon. Tony Ferguson versus Justin Gaethje. In terms of a sustained beating, it doesn't get much more brutal than the infamous Justin Gaethje versus Tony Ferguson fight back at UFC 249. COVID had just hit, and the dream Khabib versus Tony fight had fallen out for the fifth and to be final time. Despite scoring a flash knockdown in round 1, Ferguson was brutally beaten up by the highlight for 5 rounds before veteran referee Herb Dean mercifully brought a halt to proceedings with just minutes left to the fight. It was an uncomfortable watch, as a bloody and battered Ferguson's toughness was absolutely incomprehensible through 5 rounds, though by the end of the fight, the constant onslaught had finally broken him. Tony suffered a broken orbital bone during the bout and was taken to the hospital after. One controversial point is the fact that Tony had unnecessarily cut weight just weeks before the Gaethje fight, after the Khabib fight had fallen out due to COVID.
Man, it's been a long camp, I'll be real. We've been preparing since November. Obviously, the 18th didn't follow through with Khabib. Obviously, Justin was the only one that wanted to sign on the dotted line. Just a long camp, and then just, not the weight cut had nothing to do with it. Justin's a tough I'll be real.
Tony cut 24 pounds in 1 week to make the 155 limit despite the canceled fight as a mark of commitment. It's something often brought up as a potential sliding doors moment in the career of El Cucuy. Not only did the Gaethje fight end his 12-win streak, which is one of the most iconic runs in UFC lightweight history, it marked the downfall of Tony in the UFC, as he's looked a shell of himself since, racking up 0 wins in 5 attempts and getting finished multiple times, with many calling for him to retire. James Tahuna versus Stephen Bose. In a career-ending moment, James Tahuna faced Stephen Bose at UFC Fight Night 85 in March 2016, with hopes of a triumphant UFC return after 2 years away. 52 seconds into the fight, it was all over as Bose connected with a strong but manageable left hook above the right eye, which knocked Tahuna out cold. Tahuna was taken to the hospital for a standard check post-knockout, but post-fight examinations revealed a chilling reality: multiple lesions. Further scrutiny by a neurologist reviewing brain scans throughout his UFC tenure uncovered a progression of dark spots, signifying additional lesions. The KO was so bad that for a month after the fight, Tahuna suffered memory loss and forgetfulness, and after 2 months of reflection, the New Zealander decided to hang the gloves up for good.
My side effects from that knockout loss was pretty bad too. I've had some knockouts in the past, but this one I was kind of repeating myself every hour. I would forget what I was saying.
Adam Sella versus Uriah Hall. In what Dana White referred to as one of the nastiest knockouts I've ever seen in the fight business, let alone The Ultimate Fighter. The Ultimate Fighter Season 17, Jones versus Sonnen, produced one of the scariest moments in recent UFC history when prospects Uriah Hall and Adam Sella faced off. Jones coached Sella, who was going up against one of the most hyped prospects in Uriah Hall. Hall landed a devastating spinning rear hook kick which instantly sent Sella out cold, crashing hard to the canvas. Sella's hands were barely up and he took the full force of the blow, falling like he'd been shot. The entire room, filled with prospects and coaches on both teams, fell into a bone-chilling silence as medics immediately rushed in to work on Sella. A visibly shaken Hall apologized with Sella laid out on the canvas. Luckily, Sella woke up after being unconscious for 4 minutes before being helped back to his feet, where he asked Hall, "What happened, bro?" Sella was taken to the hospital straight away and had to undergo a CAT scan, which came back okay. Though for a moment, it felt like it could have ended in a far worse outcome. Uriah Hall, life-threatening weight cut. Unfortunately, that wouldn't be the only time Uriah Hall would be involved in a worrying moment involving a fighter's health within the UFC. Ahead of UFC Fight Night 124 in 2018, Hall failed to weigh in for his co-main event against Vitor Belfort. The situation took a grave turn as reports emerged that Hall fainted on his way to the weigh-ins, suffering what he described as a mini seizure and mini heart attack. It left onlookers terrified, including fellow fighter Paige Van Zandt, who tweeted out for people to pray for Hall, labeling it the scariest thing I have ever seen. Hall was walking toward the elevator and collapsed out of nowhere. I was in the elevator holding on to my best friend. Apparently, I bid him to hold on to him, Hall told ESPN. I passed out again, woke up, and there were EMTs. A guy was trying to get a needle in me, and I remember swinging. I wasn't in control of my body.
Needle in me, and they were like, hold his hand, and I remember swinging. I don't know what was happening. I wasn't in control of my body. I just started swinging, and I knew what was happening, but I couldn't control it. And I passed out again. I woke up and I was on a stretcher going out the door. I passed out. I woke up in the hospital and I was screaming for water. I was like, give me water, give me water. And like, we can't give you water yet. We gotta, whatever they have to do, they have to stick me first. And I was just like, give me fucking water.
I never felt so thirsty in my life. They finally gave me a sip and I passed out. It was probably the most traumatic experience I've ever had, said Hall. I mean, I was in and out of it. I was conscious, but I was unconscious. I knew what was happening, but I was fighting over it. I was punching. I think I had a mini seizure and at the same time a slight heart attack. My kidneys were just not good. He continued. Like I said, it was an injury that I ignored and it just caught up to me. My body was not responsive to it.
I was looking at it. As much as there was a lot of negative affirmation, I was saying to myself, the positive reinforcement is to say it's temporary. It's not forever. I just need some water after this. Let me just make it to the scale. But my body was just saying nope, and I think my kidney was so deprived. I didn't realize how important your kidney was. So this was a lesson, because your kidney basically flushes everything out. And my kidney was like, well, where's all the stuff to flush? And it pretty much had an acute failure, which is pretty much right next to shutting down.
Hall, who recovered in the hospital, also said that the doctors told him even if he'd made weight, he probably would have died the next day.
It was probably the most dramatic experience I've ever had. I mean, I was in and out of it. I was conscious, but I was unconscious. I knew what was happening, but I was fighting over it. I was punching. I think I had a mini seizure, and at the same time, a slight heart attack, and my kidneys were just not good.
This is just one of many cases of dangerous weight cuts causing extremely dangerous and even life-threatening situations for fighters in the UFC. Cal Worsham versus Zane Frazier. Cal Worsham versus Zane Frazier, all the way back in May 1996 at UFC 9, culminated in what's considered by some the most life-threatening injury ever sustained in the octagon. Mired in political smothering, UFC 9 was allowed to go forward in Detroit only when organizers agreed no closed-fist strikes to the head would be allowed. A punch to the face was the least of Worsham's concerns. Charging toward Frazier, Worsham ate a knee to the chest, which seemed to momentarily hurt him, though his poker face was strong as he quickly secured a takedown and won via a very strange TKO stoppage. Things went south quickly from here as Worsham collapsed backstage, as it was found that the knee landed by Frazier broke Worsham's ribs, damaged his heart, and collapsed his lung. Worsham spent a week in the hospital and was told his chances of surviving were questionable, though thankfully he recovered fully and continued fighting all the way until 2012. If Worsham would have died of his injuries, the question arises of whether the sport of MMA would even exist today. While the UFC celebrates triumphs and exhilarating victories, the moments that transcend the sport's bravado shine a light on the true nature of the fight game and why it must always be approached with a great degree of respect. These near-death and terrifying moments are imprints of sacrifice and courage, but above all else are reminders of the very real risks fighters endure in the chase to the top.